Welcome to the show Brain Rot, What Our Screens Are Doing to Our Minds, a special series from the New Books Network. Here are your hosts, Dr. Karen Messina and Dr. Harry Gill.
Hello, welcome back to Brain Rot, What Our Screens Are Doing to Our Minds. This is a podcast sponsored by the New Books Network. I'm Karen Messina, a psychologist and psychoanalyst, and host of the New Books Network, and I'm joined by our co-host, Dr. Harry Gill. Dr. Harry Gill is a well-known psychiatrist with a PhD in neuroscience. So our book is finally out, Disconnection Together, a guide to reclaiming connections in a digital world. And this is really an important topic these days. You've probably heard about the problem with too much screen time, and it's really everywhere. Harry, we wrote this book because of our perspective practices. We keep hearing stories about isolation in really every age group. It becomes clear that the digital world is reshaping our human minds. So what is happening with the foundational serve and return interaction when that's constantly broken by parent screen use? What is going on here when there's constant interruption?
I think the notion of serve and return it's an important aspect of any communication. With parents, obviously, need for interpretation and formulation of the world for a child's brain to learn. In all aspects of all of our communication, one person offers an idea, the other person has to pick it up, process it, contribute something to it. And in fact, we can think of it as foundational aspect of creating our experience of reality. So I want to talk a little bit about capacity of the brain to process information. It's a very foundational concept, and every person has a finite capacity to process information. We hear a lot about attention deficit disorder, attention this, attention that. The attention is really capacity of the brain to direct the resources of the sensory system to a aspect of the reality that it needs to attend to. So that's a lot of fancy words to say there's a part of the brain that says, ooh, this is important. I should direct our sensory system to process X. If you think of it in evolutionary terms, we're looking at berries to eat. And the brain is really focused on finding a berry in the forest. So there's an awful lot of data that even in that sort of primate-like experience in the forest, the brain has to suppress. Meaning, our brain is constantly processing information, pressure on our rear ends as we sit here and talk, the temperature of our environment, the background noise of the noisemakers, everything that's on the screen in front of us. There's a mountain of data that is entering the sensory system. And if we paid attention to it all, we'd lose our mind, quite literally. So the brain has an incredible filtering capacity to suppress irrelevant information so that the limited, finite attentional resources are paid or provided to something that is particularly relevant. For example, in front of me is a little piece of chocolate that is actually distracting me right now. So I'm going to put it somewhere over there. It's an example of a distracting stimulus that from appetitive perspective, the brain is playing with that while I'm trying to focus on a conversation that Karen and I are having. So serve and return is being disrupted by just one little data. So if we really think about the amount of data that we're distracted by all the time that we need to suppress, then we also need to think about the amount of psychic energy, and literally think of it as energy, glucose metabolism, that needs to be devoted to suppressing the information stream that we're paying attention to or not paying attention to, but it's simply there. So, the good data that I think we talk about in the book, the notion of an irritable parent that is distracted by a screen and is paying attention to something on the phone and the child is asking for attention. And without the screen, a parent would engage the child, ask what is needed, probably address the need, and the conversation ends. A distracted parent responds with agitation, with, why are you bothering me right now? Because I really need to read this, watch this TikTok video or read this piece of news because it's essential to do right there and then. So that serve and return in a simple restaurant setting, there's actually research that we quote in the book, is grossly disrupted by the screen. That would be an example of that. Or a loving couple that may have designs on making love after dinner, but during the dinner, they're scrolling through their respective screens. So the connection, the connectedness of two minds is disrupted by the third in between them.
If I could just add quickly here, the idea of technoference, and that's when technology interferes with the connection. And if you think about this, a little child, a baby, we'll say, or a toddler, they need their parents' reaction in order to validate their world, to understand it, to know what's going on. It's called mirroring. When the mirroring stops, a little kid is, in a sense, dumbfounded. Like my mother, my father, they were just here, and now they're not here. They have no understanding, even if it's the most important call in the world. They don't understand it. Mom or dad is there, and then they're not there. In a way that really hasn't happened, I don't think, before all this technology and technoference started. So that's obviously a big problem.
And to emphasize the notion of work that is involved, I think most people know or have heard about electroencephalography, that is measuring of electrical activity of the brain. And there are different wave types that mean different things. But for our conversation purposes, the main distinction is between alpha waves and beta waves. And alpha waves are very harmonious, synchronous waves when the brain is resting. Brain resting, meaning it's not processing information, meaning we close our eyes and it's silent and we are in a relaxed state, and alpha waves come in and the brain is resting. Right. Whenever there are beta waves, the brain is working, we're processing information. So the constant demand on the attentional system means constant work of the brain. What are the clinical problems that we talk about with people? As you mentioned, Karen, loneliness is probably number one. I would increasingly put loneliness as a number one topic for people in the world, which is where the title Disconnection Together comes. People are lonely and they're exhausted. They're not sleeping well. They're exhausted. They're constantly asked to pay attention for no real evolutionary purpose, but for purpose of commerce. As I said many times, looking at the media and screens as a necessary enemy that we have to deal with is probably the healthiest way to look at it. We have to use it because the world demands it of us, but it's a necessary tool and it's an enemy of our human experience.
Let's talk about adolescence, because we both work with adolescents and have for many years. And now there's social media and adolescent. A lot is going on. Obviously, a lot has changed. So in Erickson's stage of identity versus role confusion, it used to have to do with one thing, maybe not fitting in with the group. And maybe it's just the themes are the same, but social media has changed the name. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that. What's going on with the still maturing brain in terms of identity and role confusion, and how social media interrupts the developmental process.
It's interesting, just themes from yesterday's piece of work with patients' actual clinical experience. We're part of the world as the world changes, and the commerce always changed the world. This is not a new phenomena. It's been around forever. If somebody has a banana and we want the banana and they want us to do something in order to get a banana, we'll do it. So in the world that we live in, the commerce has shifted and is demanding prolonged adolescence. So one of the phenomena in clinical work over the last 23 years is that the adolescents are more childlike in the last decade than before. An example is a 16-year-old yesterday. We talked about food and protein intake, and I mentioned, do you know how to make an omelet? And he has no idea how to make an omelet. And I said, yeah, I can make an omelet. And I explained how to make an omelet. And he said, your mom will probably do it. And then I get an email from mom this morning. It says they had a conversation about the omelet. And she said that the child said at 16, said, well, he's lazy, doesn't want to make the omelet. Now we're talking about the family system that is prolonging the adolescence interminably, because from the concept of separation and individuation, it's hard for parents to let their children go. So there's a piece of parental influence that continues to infantilize the child. And our job is to educate people that 16 is an ever-evolving, almost adult that needs to perform a lot of functions by themselves. And there's a concept of time. Social media and computer gaming that all the kids do, something that they're willing to devote 6 hours of their time, but to make an omelet that takes maybe 10 minutes is too time-consuming and too effortful, and why bother doing it? So all of that to say that the social media and the economy that is driving adolescence and teenage years into eternity, because teenagers are more impulsive, they're more prone to spending money, and so that's the target audience. It creates this identity in which, in my client base, 21-year-olds are referring to each other as kids. And it's interesting, this modification of language where at 20-something, they don't see themselves as adults anymore.
Yeah.
Furthermore, a very interesting, I'll be controversial here, a very interesting unintended consequence of the Affordable Care Act has been extension of parental insurance coverage onto children into age 26.
Right.
All of a sudden, there is this massive incentive for kids not to separate and individuate from their parents and to continue simply for health insurance purposes to be dependent on their parents until they're 26. I think it's great from the health insurance coverage perspective. It's catastrophic from separation individuation perspective. I think this is an important topic that deserves many words, but the influence, societal influence on adolescent brain is to keep it adolescent, to keep it immature, to keep it impulsive and engaged in an immature kind of way.
Let's touch upon addiction a little bit, addiction to social media. I have a woman, a young woman, who frequently calls me or sends me a text and says, I see her a number of times a week, and she'll say, I'm not going to be able to make the session, or I'm only going to be able to make it for the last 15 minutes because I went to bed at 5:30 a.m. And this woman scrolls all night. She's anxious. She had trauma in childhood, and she was alone. And somehow this gives her the false impression that she isn't alone if she's on her phone. So she does it for hours. So obviously she's addicted to it. Could you say a little bit about that? What's going on?
And in that particular example, you have two different forces. There is the pleasure of seeing an experience that somebody else is having. If she's scrolling through Instagram or something pleasurable, it's sort of living vicariously. And also the avoidance of pain that's internal. So the notion of, why do we engage anything that is stimulus from the outside, more often than not, is the avoidance of the internal world. Maybe to mention a phenomena that I mentioned earlier, people are tired all the time and they're not sleeping. Part of the not sleeping well is that we're overstimulated during the day by external stimuli. So all of that experience cannot be consolidated because there's a constant avalanche of data that's coming in, and brain has to do something. Somebody has to fold the laundry.
Yeah.
And the brain's function is folding the laundry. So if there is a mountain of laundry at 11 p.m., the brain is going to be actively folding laundry at night, therefore making the quality of the sleep structure very poor. And then people are not sleeping well, so they continue with the stimulation. It's a very vicious cycle. And in trauma cases, the avoidance of internal world is really counter-therapeutic. Our task is to fold the laundry with our clients and to go through their internal world. Or clean up the garage, whatever term you want to use.
Let's talk quickly, because this is a podcast and we don't have time to go through our books. We do hope people buy it because it is very informative. And there are specific things you can do to correct some of these things. Let's talk a little bit about adulthood and aging. And this doesn't just affect teenagers or very young children when parents leave. As I said, there's technoference involved. Elderly people get addicted to this as well. And then I'd like to talk about hope. But let's start with adulthood and aging.
The loneliness in adults is very, very much a factor, even in couples. People are lonely. I think, there are marriages that are falling apart because people are having parallel experiences of life, not joint experiences of life. One person is watching one screen, the other person is watching another screen. They're not really sharing their experience of life, even when together. And if alone, it's really, there's a massive disappearance of social experience where single people have a really hard time connecting with other people. The local bar is no longer frequented. The grocery store is no longer attended. The restaurants are closing early. I live in Midtown Manhattan, and there's still a lot of people, but restaurants are closing earlier, and there are fewer restaurants. There are lots more bicycles and delivery people that are bringing stuff to our homes. The disastrous experience of delivery of food to our homes is creating an enormous amount of isolation. Yes, it's convenient, but there's no chit-chat that's happening. There's no shared experience. And so adults are very lonely. And I think the only real positive space for social media or this sort of artificial connectedness is in the space of elderly, as we discuss in the book. Because of mobility issues, one becomes isolated because it's really hard to get to places. And it's hard to travel to your family. It's hard to catch a plane. And the brain simply deteriorates as we get older, and some things become more and more difficult. So maintaining the connectivity with families and maintaining connectivity with the world has been a positive thing for, or the positive influence by screens to our experience of life.
Okay, well, how about if we finish on or finish the podcast with this concept, and it is neuroplasticity. I remember reading Norman Deutsch's book a number of years ago, The Brain That Changes Itself. I was very intrigued by the book, and I've read a number of things since then because there's hope in it.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you tell us about it?
Please give me the difficult task. and the reason why I'm being funny is that I'm very pessimistic about the screens and how it influences us over time, because it is very addictive. It's kind of a thing that similar to addiction to anything pleasurable. It's hard to manage, and by its entry into our world, it's also impossible to not engage. I will say that the foolish attempt by Dr. Gill to use a flip phone about 10 years ago ended very quickly, because at the end of the day, I had avalanche of things to deal with. So the fact that everybody's texting and emailing and you have to be on all the time has really changed the way we operate as human beings during the day. What is hopeful is that we do have access to a lot of information very easily, that we can learn, that we can have this amazing reference in our pocket, and can, at a drop of a hat, do a little piece of research to learn about something. If we use it judiciously, we can get differing opinions if we don't just read the AI summary of things we can explore topics that would otherwise be near impossible to explore, and we'd have to visit a local library, and who does that anymore, to look at references. So those are very positive. Access to arts, access to entertainment has been made much, much easier. But again, the hopeful part is that there are people that are able to use it judiciously. There are people that are able to put the screens away, and I think we can all do that. It simply requires hygiene. Just like you're not going to walk around with a half-eaten sandwich all day long. You put it down at some point in time. Similarly, we can put the screen down. It's not impossible to do.
Well, I think that's a good note to end on, a positive, hopeful one. And I guess the message is connect with real people as much as possible. Yes, we need to use phones. We need to use computers. There's a whole world out there of people. And that's really important for ourselves, our children, our parents, for everyone we know. So we hope you subscribe to our channel and pick up our book. It's on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and I think you'll find it to be really informative. So thanks, Dr. Gill, and until next time.
Thank you.
Talk to you then.